we've got a really interesting day of programs here, and I thank you all for being part of our family. We're going to start this morning's program with Catherine Landis, who's from the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment at Syracuse, and she's going to be talking about birds and birding in the Iroquois National Wildlife Refuge birding area, the Seneca Nation of Tonawanda, and the impacts in all of that by something called a stamp plant, which is an industrial development which has a huge amount of money coming to it to create something horrible in the middle of what is something beautiful. Native people's territory, wildlife territory, and it's going to impact all of our biodiversity, all of our nature, and all of our ability to have a better future for people coming after us. So, Catherine, come on up and tell us what this is all about, and thank you again.
Well, thank you, Jay. Thank you all for coming. Is this microphone working? Can people hear me? Okay. It's wonderful to be here in Buffalo. So I live in Syracuse. And, you know, Buffalo's not that far away, but I don't get over here as much as I probably should. But this is my first time at the Birds on the Niagara conference, and I'm really impressed by the range of programs and field trips. I really look forward to some of the presentations this afternoon and learning more about some of the environmental work that's happening here in Western New York, and also tomorrow attending some of the field trips. So anyway, so why am I here presenting on STAMP from Syracuse? Well, so Jay mentioned the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment. We're at SUNY, the College of Forestry there, and we were invited in 2019 by the Tonawanda Seneca Nation to help document the biodiversity on nation lands, and that's a real privilege, right? Because for the most part, non-native people do not, you know, just wander into indigenous nations in the state. And we were just so impressed by what we found. And the reason that we did this was was in support of the nation's resistance to the STAMP project. And so this title I have, Birding for Land Justice, is in some ways inviting other people who live closer to the area to do the same, to get out there and document some of the bird diversity in particular, to try to make the case against the stamp development. But more on that as we move along. I should also say I'm a plant ecologist, so I'm sort of venturing into this area of talking about birds, so that's my disclaimer. So I'm going to talk about today, I think in this room, I'm thinking people probably do know about STAMP, but just a little background on STAMP, how STAMP will be, or bird use of the STAMP area and possible impacts, including threatened and endangered species, impacts to the Tonawanda Seneca Nation and their resistance efforts, a little bit on that, some updates, thinking about alternative visions if we dare, and I think we have to, and how people can help. Not news to people in this audience, I'm sure you've seen this graph and know about this. I think this was 2019 Cornell study that found, you know, since 1970, we've lost almost a third of our birds. So I don't know how many of you in this room were alive in 1970, but I was, and that means, you know, in in my lifetime, we've lost a lot of birds, and this includes the emphasis here is on forest and grassland birds, but even common birds, you know, red-winged blackbirds and robins and chickadees and such. So this is, I think, just good context to keep in mind as we talk about a specific site. Okay, so just a little background on STAMP for those who need a refresher or don't know. It's an acronym, of course, for the Science and Technology Advanced Manufacturing Park. It's over 1,200 acres. And the idea is kind of if we build it, they will come. So build this site by build, I mean provide the infrastructure and then invite companies to come in, particularly looking for high-tech companies, things like photovoltaic cell manufacture, they say like green energy and this sort of thing. And anticipated to offer 9,000 jobs at full build-out. And this is important. It's not just, the development we're concerned about is not just STAMP, but the idea is that this is kind of the center of a mini city, because with the industrial development will come housing, shopping centers, offices, all that support infrastructure to run the place, as it were. Yeah, starting point for economic growth. And the developer and builder here is the Genesee County Economic Development Center. There is one company there now, Plug Power, over here on the left, and that is an actual picture of Plug Power being developed at STAMP. Not much green infrastructure there, but this is a so-called green hydrogen production facility, and again, as many of you probably know, so-called green hydrogen is not so green. There are many issues with it, including the need to truck the product for long distances in some cases. The second company that's planning to come is this Edwards Vacuum. And so these aren't like, vacuums for your carpet. These are, I guess, little tiny vacuums that help with semiconductor manufacture. So again, think, big picture, this is all part of the, the effort to bring sort of chip and supporting manufacturing back to the U.S. and to New York State in particular by Schumer, certainly, Senator Schumer. The picture on the right of Edwards Vacuum, that has not been built as of now, and that's an important point. It's, there's no, hasn't even been started. That's just a schematic drawing of what it might look like. Where is it? Well, if you look at the little inset map of New York State, it's over here. Let's see. There we go. Over here in Genesee County, not far from Buffalo, maybe 30, 40 miles. And Oak Orchard Creek, Lake Ontario watershed. And just note these large wetland complexes to the north. That is part of the problem, as you'll see. So we're zooming in a little closer. This is a map, obviously, in a different format. On the right here, these are the list of the properties that are shaded here. It's a little confusing maybe to follow, but you have Iroquois National Wildlife Refuge, and then the state wildlife management areas here, John White here, there's STAMP in red. Here's the Tonawanda-Seneca Nation. So you put this all together, and you get about 20,000 acres of wetland, grassland, forests, really high-quality habitat. One of the largest remaining contiguous habitat areas in the state, and certainly in western New York, commonly called the Alabama Swamp, again, as many of you know. Oh, and I wanted to throw this in, just because if you look at the Tonawanda-Seneca Nation on the map, it's kind of brown, it looks like a desert, and it's anything but a desert, I can tell you from being there. And I threw this cerulean warbler up because our bird team, when we did our survey, found as many as 20 cerulean warblers just in one day on the nation. And that says a lot about the quality of the forest, right? Because those warblers need mature hardwood forests. But more on that as we go along. Okay, so just a couple of the issues with STAMP. Failed 7 out of 10 of these smart growth criteria. So these are criteria that were developed by the state about 10 years ago to rank projects with a relationship to whether they contribute to sprawl or not. So things like, is it near a big city? Is it near an existing developed area? Does it take prime farmland? And STAMP failed on 7 out of 10 of these criteria. It's been called egregiously miscited. The subsidies have been crazy, including about $270 million to Plug Power alone for 66 jobs. That's $4 million a job. Edwards Vacuum also receiving subsidies, and Edwards Vacuum will, I believe, either will or has applied for subsidies under the Federal CHIPS Act, since it supports semiconductor manufacture. And then as recently as November 2023, STAMP received $56 million in more subsidies for infrastructure projects, and probably for legal bills, since it's already facing some legal challenges. Want to give a shout out to the Investigative Post. How many are familiar with the Investigative Post? Yeah, oh gosh. All right. Well, anyway, they're doing a great job reporting on STAMP, I think. So getting into location areas, issues, particularly with respect to birds, this is the Iroquois National Wildlife Refuge, Oak Orchard, and Tonawanda WMAs. Very pithy name, right? Important bird area, and I'm guessing this audience knows what IBAs are, so I won't go into that. But they're stamped there in red. So right on the edge of this IBA. And of course, the IBA is there in recognition of what I already said about the importance of this habitat. Another designation that STAMP, the area around STAMP has received, it's also a grassland bird conservation center. So this is a designation that was placed on it by the DEC. So the DEC has a grassland bird conservation strategy, and as part of that, they have mapped out 5 what they call grassland bird conservation centers in the state, and this is one of them. And there's STAMP right smack in the middle there of this area, and more on that as we go along here. And it's just notable, of the grassland bird trusts, 11 most imperiled birds, 9 are seen in or around the proposed STAMP area during their breeding season. So that's a problem. Before I go on, I just want to say I'm going to be drawing bird data from a number of sources, and I don't want this to get confusing, so I thought I would list them at the beginning. One, of course, is eBird, which is just such a tremendous resource in looking at a question like this around, say, bird use of STAMP. There were also contractors that were hired by the developer to do some bird studies on STAMP that the DEC required. And then my own office, the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment, as I already mentioned, we have done biological surveys, but mainly on nation lands. So the first 2 bullets are sources I'm drawing on for information about bird use of STAMP lands. We actually would like to to do biological surveys on STAMP lands, but so far don't have permission. And then just other breeding bird atlas and other sources. So I just want to be clear about where I'm getting this information, and it will be marked on each map. So, so the data here comes from eBird. These are sandhill crane sightings, I believe, for the last 10 years. And whoops, I guess the point of this slide is, we call this an important bird area. Well, birds, they know this. They kind of vote with their feet. They concentrate in these few remaining large contiguous areas of grasslands and wetlands and forests that we have here that have not been converted to industry or agriculture. And this happens to be for sandhill cranes, but this is repeatable for numerous other birds in the state. I mean, you could just pick, waterfowl obviously in certain conditions, but many other birds would have a pattern that's similar to this. And then the little yellow square there is approximate location of STAMP. Zooming in a little bit closer, looking at eBird data, and this is just showing the protected areas and the nation around STAMP. Again, again, sandhill crane sightings. The point here is birds, they don't just use the wildlife refuges. You know, they go outside. They use, for example, there have been a couple of sightings of sandhill cranes. Whoops. At Stamp, the red circle shows one of those points. 21 sandhill cranes were seen in 2017. So it's not just a bird here, a bird there. And then 9 were seen in 2022 within Stamp. So now I want to go into an example of a story of bird conservation gone terribly wrong on Stamp. This concerned endangered and threatened species, makes it even worse. The short-eared owl, which is endangered, and northern harrier threatened. Those are New York State listings. So I didn't mention that Stamp is also part of this winter raptor concentration area. So the DEC, I guess the natural heritage area maps show that most of the Stamp site was occupied habitat for the owl and the harrier. So the DEC required the developer to conduct studies, winter raptor studies, on Stamp property in 21-22. And lo and behold, they found short-eared owls and northern harriers using the site. So in order to continue with this industrial development, the developer was required to, by state law, to apply for this take permit. And I didn't know what take meant. I mean, it sounds like such a innocuous term, but so just in case you didn't know either, pursuing, shooting, hunting, killing, capturing, trapping, threatened and endangered species, but also all lesser acts, such as habitat destruction. To get the permit, the applicant must show a net conservation benefit, so that's good. It's a good law. The species must be left better off than they would have been if the habitat were destroyed. So this is a little bit hard to see here, but this is from the developer's contractor, and it's showing Stamp. Sorry, it didn't blow up all that well, but so here's the outline of Stamp. Tonawanda Seneca Nation is over here. The blue polygons are foraging areas for short-eared owl, again, according to the winter raptor survey they did. And then the pink shows foraging areas for northern harrier. And I'm sure you can't read this, but there were 22 sightings of short-eared owl just in this this polygon here in the northwest corner. And this is probably pretty conservative because the DEC winter raptor protocol requires these birders to go out once every 2 weeks for an hour and a half and stand in the cold at dusk and look for these birds. So probably there was a lot more short-eared owl use, I'm guessing. Anyway. And then the pink is harrier. So harriers use the entire site, but short-eared owls use mainly this corner up here, kind of near the nation. Whoops, sorry about that. And just to put this in perspective, short-eared owl used to be one of our most common owls. It used to be that you could go out and see flocks of 20 or 30. Maybe people in the room have done that. And now they're estimated less than 100 individuals in the entire state. And it's interesting, after the developer found these birds, they converted all these foraging areas to corn, to row crops, which is, I don't know vole ecology, but apparently not as good for voles. They said it was part of their normal, ag rotations, but it's pretty suspect, I would say. So what we're seeing here, the blue shaded areas, that's the area they applied to take and turn into an industrial development. And then in red here, these are the mitigation areas that were offered by the developer. In other words, this is the, we're going to take this and we're going to offer these areas, and they weren't even, not in perpetuity, but maybe for, I can't remember the exact amount of time, but there's a limited time on the protection of those areas. So yeah, two non-adjacent fields, one was 25, one was 32 acres. There was some harrier use of these areas, but no short-eared owl use at all. So you have to ask, where was the net benefit here? It certainly wasn't to the birds. Maybe to the developers, there was a net benefit. Anyway, there was a public comment period related to this permit. The DEC received about 800 letters, most of them, by far most of them, opposing the permit, including New York Audubon, New York Ornithological Association, the Western New York Environmental Alliance, who's well represented here, and the Tonawanda Seneca Nation. There's also a permit hearing held in the town of Alabama, and there you're seeing Roger Hill, a chief from the Tonawanda Seneca Nation. And everybody who spoke at that hearing was strongly against the permit. This is a quote from the New York Ornithological Association's letter. The granting the permit would set a dangerous precedent of sacrificing endangered and threatened species for industrial development. Well, that's exactly what they did, of course, was to grant this permit. So, a lot more could be said about that, but I'm going to leave it at that for right now. And go on to talk about birds that maybe aren't threatened and endangered, but would still be threatened by stamp. So here's the Grassland Bird Conservation Designation map again, just to show you stamp as part of that. So because of this and the known use of the area by grassland birds, the developer was required to conduct a grassland bird study in 2022. And here are just some of the birds that they found. Bobolink, which is listed in the state as a high priority species of greatest conservation need. Savannah sparrow, which has declined by about 40% in the last 50 years, according to the American Bird Conservancy, and a few other birds which I will discuss separately. Horned lark, interesting bird. This is eBird data and the yellow outline, approximate outline of stamp. So you're looking at sightings of horned lark over the past 20 years or so. Also confirmed they're probably nesting on the stamp property. Breeding bird atlas data reveal about a 37% decline between the current atlas and the last one, like 10 years ago, decline in detections. And it's also listed as common bird and steep decline. So I'm just trying to say, is this the place we want to put an industrial development with all this use by threatened, endangered, and birds that are struggling anyway? So that point right there, it's interesting. In eBird, you can go, of course, in and look at the data. There was a sighting of 120 horned larks in January 2021, so fairly recently. Northern harrier, we already mentioned, threatened in this state, probably nests at stamp, or at least close to stamp, and uses stamp lands during the rearing season. So I've been talking about birds that use stamp either for wintering habitat, for nesting, for foraging, but it's also part of this large complex in terms of stopover habitat. There have been documented sightings of American golden plover at stamp. This is such a fascinating bird, at least to me. So the map here on the left showing its migration journey. It's about 20,000 miles round trip from the southern end of South America all the way up to the Arctic. And of course, it needs places to stop and refuel, et cetera. So I don't have the stamp boundaries here, but those points there on or near Stamp, and if we look at this a little more closely, they're right along Stamp Drive, which is kind of ironic. One in 2008, a couple more recently, 2019. Again, flocks of like 16, 20 birds. So not just an odd bird, but at least semi-regular use of the land. So moving away from birds, just to talk about other values of Stamp. Many of you may be familiar with the Nature Conservancy's Resilient Lands Network. They've developed this map in terms of climate change resiliency. So you can go online and select an area and see what are the lands that should be protected in terms of providing spaces for biodiversity in the face of climate change. So of course, corridors for movement are really important, as well as existing habitat. And you can see that the area that we've been discussing is either green or dark green, which means resilient to climate change, areas of high resilience. And notice that, it's kind of an island there in that part of the state. So all the more reason to maintain it as protected land. So of course, there's a huge environmental justice issue here around the Tonawanda Seneca Nation, as Jay mentioned. In case you don't know what environmental justice is, at least one definition, these issues involve the siting of large industrial and commercial development adjacent to historically disempowered communities. So here's a classic case of an environmental justice violation with Stamp cited right next to the nation. The Big Woods, which is, let's see, this area right here on the nation. So right next to Stamp is used for hunting, gathering, and other purposes, not only by people at Tonawanda Seneca Nation, but throughout the Confederacy. People from Tuscarora, people from Akwesasne come to the Big Woods to hunt, to gather medicines. And of course, there's issues about impacts to air and water quality, noise and light pollution from having this thing next door. This is a quotation from Roger Hill, who I showed you his picture earlier, and I'll just let you read that. And the one thing I'll emphasize about this quote is, I've been talking about birds and environmental impacts, but the last line where he says, this is not just an environmental concern, this is a human rights issue. Kirk Skirdo, the family physician for the nation, has been quite vocal about impacts to the health of the Tonawanda Seneca Nation community. From air pollution, either causing or exacerbating existing conditions around respiratory issues, heart disease. Edwards Vacuum apparently has a history of explosions, which is a little concerning for public health. And I just want to say that based on our studies of the Tonawanda Seneca Nation within the borders, they're outstanding stewards of birds. They're doing their due diligence, and I think we need to do ours. This was like a one-day survey on the nation, found 85 species, 10 pairs of nesting cerulean warblers, which is just, at least for central New York, maybe that's more common out here, but that's just unheard of. Cerulean warbler, of course, is a species of special concern in the state, which means it's just below threatened. And of course, they rely on those large trees and gallery forests as I was saying earlier. We saw 4 common nighthawks, high priority species of greatest conservation need, and then woodcock, black-billed cuckoo, great egret, and northern harrier. And this is a quote from the report that was written by our bird team. The birds within the mature forest habitat of the Tonawanda Seneca, of the Tonawanda Nation, remained active and vocal throughout the day, which may indicate greater population densities, at least compared to central New York that they're used to. Our impression from the short survey was that this forest holds an exceptional number and diversity of birds. I mean, they were just really impressed. And if you have birds, it means you have the trees, you have the understory, you have the native plants. You don't have the invasive plants. You have the insects, right? I mean, you know, birds are sort of just an indicator of the outstanding habitat on nation lands. So just a couple of updates. Again, some of you in this group may know about this, but this wastewater pipeline, I'm calling it a fiasco, but the purpose was to release wastewater from the wastewater treatment plant on Stamp. So as part of the infrastructure for the Stamp project, you know, there's power lines, roads, you know, water pipes, but also there's a wastewater treatment plant, and that's a whole nother story I won't get into, but the pipeline construction started over the summer. They got the permits, and the idea was to discharge treated water through and along this pipeline through Iroquois National Wildlife Refuge into Oak Orchard Creek, up to 6 million gallons a day. And this is the odd thing, right? At this point, there's nobody even who would use this. By nobody, I mean there's no tenants who would even use this pipeline, but they're still building it. Anyway, so a lawsuit was filed by Orleans County. There were, you know, a couple of different grievances, but certainly one was, you know, we don't want Genesee County's wastewater coming into Oak Orchard Creek, in part because of the recreational value of the creek. In August, there were spills of the drilling fluid right into the refuge. Not just a few drops, but 500 to 700 gallons. There were more spills in September. And again, these were hazardous materials. I'm not sure what was in the fluid, but could find out if you're interested. The Tonawanda Seneca Nation sued the Fish and Wildlife Service for failure to consult and also for violating federal laws about drilling in a national wildlife refuge. So resistance is certainly happening. So, I mean, there's more I could say about updates, but I think just to move on, this is a really important point. It's not too late. And this is a wonderful quote from the letter that just went out, or is about to go out. I'm not sure of the status, but Western New York Environmental Alliance going to various leaders and agencies. Some say it's too far along. You know, all this money invested and some infrastructure. But as of yet, there's little industrial development, right? Plug Power is the only industry that's even started building, and Plug Power may go down the drain, it sounds like, right? Financially, if you've been following some of the stories with Plug Power's financial situation. Most of the 1,250 acres remain rural fields. It's not too late to invest in the true value of this land. So I thought that was so well put. So what do we do? Well, just in terms of visioning, I'm not sure how this would happen, but think about, is there a way to include Stamp in the formal kind of network of protected lands in this area that we've been talking about? This map I have courtesy of the Western New York Land Conservancy. It's a piece of the Western New York Wildway, and I understand there'll be a presentation about that later. And I'm looking forward to learning more because I know very little about it. But anyway, the fact that it could provide a vision for a different use of stamp, I think is really valuable. And maybe a better idea, or maybe it could be incorporated into kind of the same idea, would be return stamp land to the Tonawanda Seneca Nation. I saw, and I shared a little bit with you, the outstanding stewardship of the Tonawanda Seneca people on their land. As I said, they're doing their part for birds, and we need to do ours. And what you see there, that shaded area, well, let's see, there's two things. One is, of course, that here's the Tonawanda Seneca Nation, and then this is the outline of the 70 square mile treaty of big tree lands that was supposedly reserved for the Tonawanda Seneca people in 1797. Now, we also could say that all of Western New York is Seneca territory, but let's just focus on this treaty for now. Of course, stamp falls well within that treaty, supposedly treaty-protected area. So is there a way to give that land back to the nation? I don't know. It's worth thinking about. Things you can do, join the Allies. You can just go to this website. If you Google Allies of Tonawanda Seneca Nation, there's a Google form. You can get on their mailing list, stay informed. There'll be action alerts, write your leaders, educate others if you belong to a bird club or whatever, because at least people now know more about stamp. I would say about when we started our work, a lot of people hadn't even heard of it, because we reached out to Rochester and Buffalo Audubon, and they seem to know very little about it. Anyway, and then back to my title, Birding for Land Justice. You can be part of the folks who are collecting data about bird use of stamp and surrounding areas. Can't go on stamp, at least we don't have permission yet. Well, actually you can. There are public roads. Crosby Road goes right through the middle of stamp. Judge Road goes down the southern end here. But here, John White, you could bird from John White, the Tonawanda Wildlife Management Area up north. I don't recommend going on the nation lands without permission. And then I have Help CNPE, that's my office, collect data. Let me just give you an example. The nation asked us over the winter to lead a winter raptor survey, and we were thinking, who would be some birders in Western New York who could help us with that? So anyway, if you're interested, I can just let me know. I have my emails is later in the presentation. I list it. Anyway, so just to wrap things up, bird numbers are not doing well. We need these relatively intact habitats. Think about land return to the nation, or at least protecting stamp in some way, and that we all play a key role. And thank you all for coming. And then there's just some acknowledgments there. And I don't know if there's time for questions or, so thank you.
Yes, there's definitely time for questions. You've got about 10 minutes.
Okay.
If anybody has any questions.
Or comments? Yes.
Okay. I'm not a birder. I don't belong to most of the organizations that you do. I do belong to the Western New York Land Conservancy, and that's the only reason I know about this. You see, I'm just trying to say you need to do a better job of letting the people that don't belong to any of these organizations know about what's going on.
I agree. It's a really good point. And we have, so the nation has hired at least part-time organizer, and she has reached out to Buffalo News, New York Times, I mean, all these media outlets, and they just don't seem to pick up the story. And that's why we're kind of relying on the investigative post, and it's been a real problem to get the word out. I mean, I really appreciate your comment because I think you're exactly right. I may be preaching to the choir here. And if you have any ideas for how we can do that, I would really welcome them.
Well, I'm thinking more local level. I mean,
Yeah.
there's the Amherst Bee is the whole Bee newspaper. It's a free paper. It's distributed. It's about local things that are going on.
Yeah.
And I've never seen anything about this whole stamp thing or any information about meetings or anything.
Right. Yeah, I would love to hear about this publication and maybe we can get something in there. But I think you raise a really important point. Certainly in Syracuse, if I tell people about this, they've never heard of it. So.
Well, I mean, we're local and we've never
And you're local.
heard
You're
about
local and you've never heard of it. Yeah, well, if anybody here has any ideas how to get the word out, it would be good. Although I think folks from Western New York Environmental Alliance have been working to do that, and other organizations. So, anyway, yes.
Wait. Hello? Yep.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I know you mentioned there's sort of this, like, if we build it, they will come kind of attitude about why this is being pushed through. And I just wondered if you could maybe say a little bit more about why they're really pushing this and funding it when there's no tenants and there's such community opposition, if you have any sense of that.
Oh, boy. I don't know. Well, I do know. This is just a guess. And again, people in the audience may have a better idea than I do, but I think this is part of Schumer's vision for the reindustrialization of New York to revive the factory, the manufacturing power of upstate New York. And he's not thinking about location. He's just thinking about, put it here. In Syracuse, we have Micron coming, and then there's something in Albany, I think. I think there's federal, our federal legislators are behind this, as well as certainly local. The GCEDC, which is Genesee County Economic Development Center, is pushing this. And I mean, another thing to think about is, that I've heard is move stamp. Like, is there a way we could respond to, say, the Genesee County's interest in economic development, but protect these areas? Could we move stamp? I don't know if you can move it within Genesee County, but I don't know, provide some other avenues for economic development that are more in line with, what we know about protecting our life support system. So, but if anybody else has any other ideas about why this continues to be pushed through, it's got to be politics at the top. That's what I'm assuming. Yes.
One of the things I see, and it's a real mystery, is like all of a sudden we have a certain judge, because it comes down to lawsuits.
Should I get out of
And
here?
all of a sudden you have this certain judge that's this picked. And I would like to know, how does that happen, right? It's always the case where all of a sudden you find a judge, and the judge doesn't go your way. And it seems to be that happens a lot. And I think the environmental side of the problem, you get to know that system. How are these judges all of a sudden picked for these lawsuits?
Yeah, I think you raise a really good point that the judges who are making these decisions just without any public input or anything, but also I think local governments in general are making a lot of decisions for which there's not a lot of public input, and yeah, we need to pay more attention at the local level. So, but yeah, good point, Mark.
No, actually, we have to cut it off. So thank you. Sorry. I apologize. We have another program we've got to set up for. Listen, these are great questions, and thanks for asking. Thank you, Catherine. That's amazing stuff. The bird stuff is incredible. I was reminded, and I've had a complicated 48 hours, but I forgot to introduce myself when we started. My name is Jay Burney, and thank you all for coming. We're here as part of a Birchfield Collaborates program, and thank you to Birchfield also. We'll be back in about 15 minutes with 30 by 30 by the West New York Environmental Alliance. Stick around. That's going to be a very interesting community dialogue presentation. Thanks.